The wooden stock of the Mosin-Nagant feels alien against Jake McNiece's cheek as he settles into position behind the crumbling brick wall of what was once a baker's shop in Veliki. November rain drums against the shattered roof tiles, each drop echoing like distant rifle fire through the skeletal remains of the Russian town. The rifle, stripped from a dead Soviet sniper 3 days earlier, carries Cyrillic markings he cannot read, but the fundamentals remain the same: breath control, sight picture, follow-through. His M1 Garand lies useless beside him, the action jammed beyond field repair after the ambush near Smolensk that separated him from his squad and landed him in this impossible situation. 2 weeks as an escaped POW, following railroad tracks east instead of west, had brought him to this pocket of Soviet resistance where language barriers dissolve under the weight of shared desperation. Through the rifle's iron sights, McNiece watches German soldiers herding Russian civilians toward the town square. Children clutch their mothers' coats, while elderly men stumble over cobblestones slick with rain and blood. The sight twists something deep in his chest, the same protective fury that once drove him to volunteer for the Filthy 13, that made him the demolition NCO who never quite followed orders the way officers preferred. "We go tonight," the woman named Katya had told him in broken German, their only shared language. "Tomorrow they take everyone west. No more chances." Her partisan band numbers barely 20 fighters armed with hunting rifles and improvised explosives. Against 2 Wehrmacht squads and an armored car, they need more than courage. They need the kind of reckless precision that once made McNiece infamous among the 506th PIR. But here in Russia, carrying a foreign rifle with 17 rounds between him and failure, reputation means nothing. The plan sketched in mud behind a burned-out church relies on diversions and timing. Katya's fighters will draw German attention north and south while McNiece positions himself in the church bell tower, the only vantage point offering clear sightlines to the schoolhouse where civilians are imprisoned. His job: provide covering fire for what Katya calls the fearless push, a desperate sprint across open ground to breach the building before panic leads to executions. McNiece studies the tower's damaged stairs, calculating angles and escape routes with the methodical mind that once analyzed bridge supports and demolition points in Normandy. The wooden beams offer commanding views but zero protection from return fire. Every shot will have to count, every target carefully chosen to maximize the effect of his limited ammunition. The Mosin-Nagant's unfamiliar weight settles in his hands as he arranges 17 rounds within easy reach. Below, German sentries light cigarettes against the evening chill, their faces briefly illuminated by match flames. McNiece memorizes each position, each weapon, each potential threat to the civilians, depending on his ability to adapt everything he learned as a paratrooper to this foreign rifle and impossible mission. Rain continues its steady percussion against stone and steel, masking the sound of Katya's fighters moving into position. In 6 hours, the diversions will begin. In 6 hours and 15 minutes, the fearless push will either succeed or collapse into catastrophe. McNiece checks the rifle's action one more time, his Oklahoma drawl silent in a Russian town where American stubbornness might be the difference between freedom and forced labor camps. If stories like this make you imagine what you'd do under fire, tell us in the comments how you think you'd react in this situation. And stay with us for the next chapters. The church bell tower creaks under McNiece's weight as he settles into the sniper's nest that will either save 43 civilians or become his tomb. Through gaps in the damaged stonework, Veliki spreads below him like a broken promise. Streets that once bustled with market vendors, now patrolled by Wehrmacht soldiers, houses that sheltered families, now serving as German strongpoints. His hands move automatically, arranging ammunition clips with the muscle memory of 100 demolition setups from the Normandy bocage to the Dutch canals. But instead of blasting caps and detonation cord, he works with 7.62mm cartridges and the stubborn bolt action of a rifle that belonged to a Soviet sniper whose name he'll never know. "You understand bridges," Katya had said earlier, watching him study the town's layout with an engineer's eye. "This is same thing. We break their positions, people cross to safety." The comparison feels apt. Every demolition mission began with the same calculation: where to place charges for maximum effect, how much time the fuse would allow, which structures had to fall to deny the enemy their objectives. Here, German machine gun nests and observation posts formed the critical infrastructure he needed to disrupt. Through the rifle scope, McNiece identifies his priority targets. The machine gun crew covering the square's north approach, the sniper positioned in the grain mill's upper window, the communications team running wire between the schoolhouse and the German command post. Each represents a link in the chain of control that keeps those civilians trapped. Movement below catches his attention. A Wehrmacht sergeant directing soldiers to reinforce the schoolhouse guard. McNiece counts muzzle flashes from earlier reconnaissance. At least 19 enemy soldiers in defensive positions around the square. His 17 rounds suddenly feel inadequate, but inadequate supplies had never stopped him before. In Normandy, he'd blown crucial bridges with half the prescribed explosive charges. Innovation under pressure was what separated the Filthy 13 from regulation paratroopers. The rain intensifies, turning cobblestones into mirrors that reflect the harsh glare of German floodlights. McNiece adjusts his position to avoid silhouetting against the tower's broken windows. The Mosin-Nagant feels heavier now, weighted with responsibility that extends beyond military objectives to include children who shouldn't be herded like livestock toward work camps. Distant explosions echo from the town's northern edge. Katya's first diversion, igniting fuel drums near the railroad station. German voices shout orders as soldiers rush toward the disturbance, exactly as planned. McNiece tracks their movement through the rifle scope, noting which positions they abandon and which remain heavily defended. The armored car's engine roars to life, its driver maneuvering toward the explosion site. Fewer defenders around the schoolhouse, but still enough to cut down Katya's fighters if McNiece can't neutralize the key threats. His index finger finds the trigger, muscle memory from countless hours on Oklahoma ranges and European battlefields converging on this moment when foreign steel and desperate necessity meet. 3 sharp whistle blasts pierce the night, the signal for the fearless push. McNiece's world narrows to sight, picture and breathing as Katya's fighters emerge from shadows, sprinting across the rain-slicked square toward the schoolhouse where 43 souls wait for liberation or death. The Mosin-Nagant speaks first, its unfamiliar recoil driving against McNiece's shoulder as his first shot drops the German machine gunner before the weapon can traverse toward the running figures below. The machine gun nest erupts in confusion as McNiece works the Mosin-Nagant's bolt, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a fresh round. His second shot shatters the floodlight illuminating the square's eastern approach, plunging half the area into protective darkness. Return fire begins immediately, rifle bullets and machine pistol bursts raking the church tower, forcing him to duck between shots. Below, Katya leads her fighters in a weaving sprint across open ground, using abandoned carts and rubble piles for momentary cover. McNiece rises from behind the stone parapet, acquiring targets by muzzle flashes and moving shadows. The German sniper in the grain mill swings his rifle toward the running partisans. McNiece's third shot sends the enemy marksman tumbling backward from his window perch. The Mosin-Nagant's action feels less foreign now, desperation creating fluency in its unfamiliar rhythm. Each shot carries the weight of children's faces, glimpsed through schoolhouse windows, of elderly villagers who survived Stalin's purges only to face Hitler's labor camps. McNiece had blown bridges to stop tanks. Here, he dismantles German defensive positions one careful shot at a time. Splinters rain from wooden beams as enemy fire intensifies around his position. A rifle bullet sparks off the church bell, the metallic ring echoing across the square like a death knell. McNiece shifts position, using the tower's stone supports for cover while maintaining sightlines to critical targets. The armored car returns from investigating the northern diversion, its machine guns seeking targets among Katya's fighters. McNiece aims for the vehicle's vision ports, hoping to blind or unnerve the crew inside. His shots ring against steel plating without penetrating, but the psychological effect works. The gunner's fire becomes wild and unfocused. Katya reaches the schoolhouse first, her fighters establishing a defensive perimeter while she places explosive charges against the locked doors. The sight reminds McNiece of countless demolition operations where everything depended on precise timing and steady hands under fire. But those missions targeted enemy infrastructure. This one aims to free innocent souls from becoming statistics in Hitler's war machine. A Wehrmacht squad leader attempts to organize a counterattack from the square's western edge. McNiece's next shot drops the sergeant before he can deploy his men effectively. Leaderless soldiers seek cover instead of advancing, buying precious seconds for the rescue operation. Through the rifle scope, McNiece watches the schoolhouse doors disappear in a shower of splinters and smoke. Civilians begin streaming out. Men, women, children, elderly villagers, moving with the desperate energy of people glimpsing unexpected freedom. But German reinforcements are converging from 3 directions, and his ammunition count drops with each necessary shot. The church tower has become the focus of concentrated enemy fire. Half a dozen German riflemen target his position, forcing him to stay low between engagements. The wooden beams around him are being systematically destroyed, and soon his perch will become untenable. Below, the last civilians emerge from the schoolhouse as Katya's fighters provide covering fire toward the forest tree line. Children stumble across cobblestones while their mothers shield them from ricocheting bullets. An elderly man falls, helped to his feet by teenagers who refuse to abandon him to German pursuit. McNiece realizes that his position draws enemy attention away from the escaping civilians. Every shot aimed at the tower is one less bullet threatening innocent lives. Instead of retreating, he continues firing with methodical precision, making each remaining round count for maximum disruption of the German response. A bullet creases his shoulder, spinning him against the tower wall. Another shatters his backup rifle stock. McNiece chambers what he believes is his final round, taking careful aim at the armored car's machine gunner. The shot finds its mark, silencing the vehicle's most dangerous weapon. Would you follow the orders exactly, or trust what your own eyes and instincts tell you in a moment like this? Comment which path you'd take, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. 3 long whistle blasts echo across the square, Katya's withdrawal signal. The fearless push has succeeded, but McNiece remains in the bell tower, covering the retreat with an empty rifle and nothing but stubborn loyalty between the escaping civilians and German pursuit. His hands find 2 forgotten cartridges in his jacket pocket, overlooked in the initial count. Sometimes salvation comes in small packages. He loads the first round and scans for targets through the scope. German soldiers emerge from cover, attempting to organize pursuit of the fleeing partisans and civilians. McNiece's shot drops a lieutenant, pointing toward the forest, scattering his squad back into defensive positions. 1 round remaining. The church tower shudders under concentrated fire, wooden beams splintering around him like kindling. Stone chips pepper his face as rifle bullets seek gaps in his cover. Through the smoke and chaos, he glimpses the last civilians reaching the tree line. Children disappearing into darkness while their protectors lay down, suppressing fire from the forest edge. McNiece chambers his final cartridge and settles the Mosin-Nagant stock against his shoulder. Below, a German squad leader rallies his men for a final push toward the forest. 1 shot, One target, one last chance to buy time for innocent souls to escape the machinery of war. The rifle speaks its final word, and the enemy leader crumples. German pursuit falters as leaderless soldiers debate whether to advance without orders or consolidate their positions around the now empty schoolhouse. Those precious seconds of confusion allow Katya's group to disappear completely into the November woods. With his ammunition exhausted, McNiece abandons the tower using a rope he'd prepared as an emergency escape route. He slides down the exterior wall as Wehrmacht soldiers storm the church interior, their boots echoing through empty sanctuaries. The Mosin-Nagant comes with him, a foreign rifle that had bridged the gap between American determination and Russian desperation. He reaches the forest tree line as pursuit finally organizes behind him. Katya waits in the shadows, her face streaked with mud and cordite smoke. Without words, she takes the empty rifle from his hands, running her fingers along its scarred stock with the reverence of someone who understands that tools become sacred when used to preserve human dignity. 43, she whispers in broken German, holding up her fingers to emphasize the count. 12 children. The number settles into McNiece's memory like a demolition charge set with perfect precision. He'd blown bridges to stop enemy armor, destroyed fuel dumps to starve their logistics, collapsed buildings to deny them shelter. But he'd never used a foreign rifle to dismantle a system designed to reduce human beings to forced labor statistics. They moved deeper into the forest as German search teams spread through the abandoned town behind them. The Mosin-Nagant bounces against Katya's back as she leads him toward partisan camps hidden in ravines and thickets. Tomorrow, Soviet forces might retake Velikie Luki. Tonight, 43 civilians sleep free because an escaped American POW learned to speak fluent Russian through 7.62 Nina cartridges and desperate necessity. The rifle that had felt so foreign in the church tower now seems like an extension of McNiece's will, proof that courage translates across all languages and weapon systems. He'd adapted bridge demolition principles to urban sniper work, applied airborne improvisation to partisan operations, and discovered that the fundamentals of protecting innocent lives remain constant, whether you're fighting in French hedgerows or Russian towns. Rain continues falling through bare branches as they disappear into the November darkness, carrying memories that will outlast any official reports or medal citations. 3 days after the schoolhouse rescue, Soviet armor rumbles through Velikie Luki's liberated streets as McNiece sits in a basement command post, facing a Red Army colonel who speaks careful English. The Mosin-Nagant rests against the wall beside him, a silent witness to operations that won't appear in any American after-action reports. "You are escaped prisoner," the colonel states, consulting papers provided by Katya's partisan network. "Transport convoy ambushed near Smolensk, yes?" McNiece nods, but his attention drifts to the rifle that had bridged 2 desperate weeks between capture and repatriation. The official story would record him as assisted Soviet forces while evading capture, a sanitized phrase that couldn't capture the weight of 43 lives balanced against 17 bullets and foreign steel. The secret he'd carry forever wasn't about courage under fire or improvised marksmanship with unfamiliar weapons. It was about the moment in the bell tower when he'd chosen to remain and cover the retreat, knowing that his position drew enemy fire away from escaping civilians. The choice hadn't felt heroic, just necessary, like setting demolition charges on a bridge to stop enemy armor. Katya Volkov describes unusual assistance, the colonel continues, glancing at a handwritten report. American soldier, sniper support for civilian evacuation. Very precise shooting. What the report couldn't describe was the tremor in McNiece's hands afterward, or how the sound of church bells would trigger memories for decades to come. In Normandy, he'd blown bridges and watched steel collapse into rivers. Here, he'd used a Soviet rifle to dismantle German defensive positions 1 shot at a time. and the precision required had left marks deeper than any shrapnel wound. The colonel produces the Mosin-Nagant, holding it with the respect due to weapons that have served beyond their original purpose. Katia requests this rifle be returned to you. Unusual, but partisan leaders earn certain considerations. McNiece accepts the rifle, feeling its familiar weight despite the brief time they'd shared. The Cyrillic markings remain unreadable, but he understands its message. Sometimes salvation arrives in foreign packages, requiring adaptation rather than expertise. He'd learned its bolt-action rhythm under fire, mastered its sight picture through necessity, and discovered that marksmanship principles transcend language barriers. Official repatriation through Moscow tomorrow, the colonel explains, stamping papers with bureaucratic efficiency. Transport to American lines via Murmansk convoy. You will be debriefed by your own officers. The debrief would focus on intelligence gathered during his escape, German unit dispositions, Soviet partisan capabilities, enemy logistics in occupied territory. No one would ask about the weight of foreign rifles or the sound that 17 cartridges make when fired to preserve innocent lives. The filthy 13 reputation for unauthorized innovation would overshadow any questions about weapons procurement or tactical improvisation. McNiece runs his thumb along the rifle's stock, feeling scars left by previous owners who'd carried it through battles he'd never know. Tomorrow, American transport would begin his journey back to familiar weapons and regulation procedures. Tonight, he'd clean the Mosin-Nagant one final time and remember how desperate circumstances had taught him to speak fluent Russian through precisely placed shots. Outside, Soviet soldiers distribute food to liberated civilians, while engineers assess damage to the town's infrastructure. 43 people move through those streets because an escaped POW had traded his jammed M1 Garand for a dead sniper's rifle and learned its lethal vocabulary in 3 days of partisan cooperation. The real secret wasn't tactical, it was emotional. He discovered that protecting innocent lives felt the same whether you spoke English or Russian, whether you carried familiar weapons or adapted to foreign steel under fire. The troop ship bringing McNiece back to American lines carries men whose stories won't fit easily into official reports. In the cramped quarters below deck, he keeps the Mosin-Nagant wrapped in canvas, its foreign markings hidden from curious eyes that might ask questions he can't fully answer. The rifle represents more than captured equipment. It's proof that courage adapts to any weapon system when innocent lives hang in the balance. Weeks later, sitting in a replacement depot outside London, McNiece fields questions from a bored intelligence officer who reduces 2 weeks of partisan operations to checkbox categories on standardized forms. Escaped POW, assisted friendly forces, no classified intelligence compromised. And the bureaucratic language strips away everything that mattered. The weight of foreign steel, the sound of children reaching safety, the tremor in his hands afterward. Any equipment recovered during evasion? The officer asks, pen hovering over official documents. McNiece glances at the wrapped rifle, leaning against his bunk. Soviet rifle, sir. Picked it up after my Garand jammed. The classification becomes captured enemy equipment via friendly forces. Another checkbox that misses the human truth. How do you explain learning marksmanship in a language you don't speak? How do you describe the moment when foreign steel becomes extension of American will? The Mosin-Nagant travels with him through replacement processing, aboard transport ships crossing the Atlantic, and finally to a small farmhouse in Oklahoma, where his family asks careful questions about his time overseas. The rifle hangs above the fireplace, its Cyrillic markings mysterious to neighbors who see only war souvenir where McNiece recognizes sacrament. Years pass. The filthy 13 reputation grows through war stories and reunion speeches, but McNiece rarely mentions those November days in Veliky Luki. How do you explain using enemy weapons to save Russian children to audiences expecting familiar heroics with American equipment? The foreign rifle becomes his private communion with a different kind of warfare. Not about destroying enemy infrastructure, but preserving human dignity one precise shot at a time. Decades later, when church bells ring on Sunday mornings, McNiece sometimes hears echoes of that bell tower where he'd chosen covering fire over personal safety. The tremor returns to his hands, not from age, but from memories that live deeper than muscle and bone. The Mosin-Nagant watches from above the mantle, silent witness to operations that never made official histories. A letter arrives in 1962, postmarked Moscow, containing a single photograph. 43 people gathered around a memorial stone in rebuilt Velikie Luki. Children who'd escaped forced labor camps have grown into adults, parents themselves, carrying forward lives preserved by foreign cooperation and 17 carefully placed shots. On the reverse, someone has written in careful English, "November gratitude never forgets." McNiece studies the faces in the photograph, searching for recognition in features aged by decades of Soviet reconstruction. These are the people whose lives had balanced against his ammunition count, whose freedom had required learning Russian marksmanship principles under fire. The rifle above his fireplace suddenly feels heavier, weighted with connections spanning continents and ideologies. Late at night, when insomnia brings back the war, he sometimes takes down the Mosin-Nagant and works its bolt action, muscle memory intact despite years of peaceful farming. The rifle's mechanism moves smoothly, maintained by hands that remember when precision meant survival for strangers who'd become temporary family in desperate times. The secret he'd carried home wasn't about ammunition counts or tactical innovation. It was about discovering that protecting innocent lives creates bonds stronger than nationality, that sometimes the most important battles are fought with foreign weapons for people whose names you'll never know. If this story reminded you that behind every medal and mission report there's a human being carrying memories we'll never fully see, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story.